So we are in the process of triangulating three signals to locate our character and calling, our place in God's mission for our life. And so a couple weeks ago I started out and we talked about gifts. So we had our gifts, our sling, which is our natural gifts, and our harp, our spiritual gifts, as we talked about the David and Goliath story. Spiritual gift is that thing where God puts his super on our natural abilities. But tonight we're going to talk about passion. And so here's the thing that's going to be really powerful for a lot of people when we talk about passion, because it's going to dive into what it is that drives you to do, to use those gifts that God's put in you. And so when we talk about passion, some people define it as a strong feeling or an experience of being alive in some situations, you know. When that thing that you find in your life that you're like, it just clicks for me. This is the thing that gets me going. And this is what I was made for. That's kind of a definition for a lot of people of passion. Now, as we discover God's assigned passions for our lives, the feelings, what ends up happening is in our lives is the feelings of being lost and confused are going to shift. And we're going to feel that we're gaining clarity about our place in life. So gifts, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, that'll outline some of that direction. But when we add in our passions, we tap into the power source that motivates our pursuit of calling. And we need this. It is essential. It's what motivates us, and it's what puts us into our pursuit. And what happens, though, sometimes our callings won't be easy, or they won't be simple. Sometimes they get kind of tough, and we hit some road bumps. But when things get tough, remember the old 80s song, The Tough Get Going? And the way we do that is because we're fueled by knowing our why, knowing our passions. And that's what keeps pushing us ahead, even when it gets tough. And my son has this script that he had vinyled onto his wall of his bedroom when he was playing football that said, "Know your why." And this was his motivational thing. When they got on the field, they'd say, "Know your why. Why are you playing your position? Why is your position important in this team playing football? Know your why you're doing it and do it well." And that's what we're trying to uncover in the talk, speaking about gifts and passions. And next week, when we do wrap this up, talking about our stories. Now, the New Testament in the Bible describes in great detail the sinful world we're born into. It describes dark rulers, principalities, powers, and authorities, and that there's a conflict going on in the unseen realm witnessed in our earthly realm. And this is witnessed by poverty, disease, illiteracy, sex trafficking, racism, and the list goes on. And it's not just a dysfunction of our human experience, but it becomes this systematic, demonic evil. But guess what? We are called to set people caught up in slavery to these addictions for sinful desires. We're called to set them free. To speak truth to those who are lost and rescue them from demonic influence by the power of the gospel. And when we do not walk in faith and clearly understand our passions, we end up ignoring our responsibilities and fighting each other like a drunken sailors that are out on leave. We lose sight of our passion, our revealed battle station, and we fight the wrong people in the wrong battles. And we can probably all think of some time that a Christian brother or sister has made a mountain out of something, losing sight of rescuing the lost, right? Maybe it was a church you were in where they got all fired up about the topic of security and salvation, or the name it and claim it, or women in the church, or we could make this exhaustive list of things that don't relate to rescuing people from sin that the church has gotten caught up in over the years, right? And if we're not careful, we sit around fighting each other rather than completing the thing God has called us to do. And the thing is, God has called us to fight. He's designed us to fight. He's given us tools for the fight. And he's also taught us to love what is good and to seek justice in the world. We are made to slay giants. And we need to know what our job is on the battlefield. And we must also know what our gifts and passions are so we know which battle to fight. So back to our story of David from a couple weeks ago. we were reading out of 1 Samuel 17. And so the Philistines, right, they've been harassing and terrorizing the Israelites for about 200 years. David's brothers, the Gaston guys, the big strong guys, the older brothers, they're sent to the front lines to fight. And Jesse, their father, he calls David out of the fields. And David, who's too young to fight, too small, too frail in their eyes, they set him up to take supplies to the battle line to his brothers. And now David gets there, and David arrives, and what does he find? Nobody's engaged in the fight. Nobody's fighting the Philistines. They're all kicked back, kind of pieced out of it for a minute. In ancient times, and this is what ends up happening with David, it's not uncommon for two warring nations or tribes to have a champion battle. The Philistines have to pick their brute, right? They pick big old Goliath that almost everyone's heard of, right? Even if you don't know the Bible, you've heard about this David and Goliath matchup, right? Sportscasters use it all the time when they talk about a matchup between the underdog team and the big team that's always winning. Seems like the Chiefs were always engaged in that David and Goliath up until they finally won the Super Bowl, right? I mean, it was always a rebuilding year, and then here they are in this match, and they won it. And so we always hear about that. But so we'll go back to our story. 1 Samuel 17, 3 and 7. The Philistines occupied one hill, and the Israelites another, with a valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was about 6 cubits and a span, which is big. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale, armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. And on his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. So basically, if I did all the math, what it means is Goliath was this big dude who had a lot of big, scaly, scary armor and big tools. Right? But I didn't do the math for you. So, this isn't the first time that God's people faced an enemy in scales. The first time we read about an enemy in scales that God's people had to deal with was written in Genesis with Adam and Eve, when the first Adam failed. In David's story, so it becomes a reflection of a bigger story, that God's people are facing down their enemy and battling what evil and corruption there is in this world. So here's a big part of the Philistine evil. All right, for this time, they worshipped Dagon, the god of fertility, and they sacrificed children, to the point that sometimes they sacrificed them alive in fire. Now connect the enemies of God with the evil we face today. The Jewish concentration camp, lynchings in Mississippi, children being sold in European countries to harvest organs, human trafficking, abortion. Whenever you think of an injustice in our world, think of a Goliath. And sin, the sin of Goliath, this Goliath sin that we face and sin in our lives, it's something that stretches across cultures, generations, and it becomes a system to oppress and marginalize people. And then we've gone and we've domesticated Goliath into this friendly motivational poster to tell people they can get that promotion, or their kid can win a soccer game. And we take the giant devil that he was and that sin is, and we take it out of context. Because the battle between good and evil is so much bigger than you can do it. And God is looking for unlikely warriors to say, God, I want in on this battle. So David, he hits the battlefield, and this is how it's recorded in 1 Samuel 17. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for this man who kills? What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David shows up and he says, who's this punk and why does he matter? Why haven't you done something with him yet? He sees the fight and he says, put me in, coach. I'm ready. Let's go. And if we put ourselves in David's shoes with today's mindset, we'd probably look at that Goliath and we'd say, you know what, I didn't go to college for this. I didn't go to Bible seminary. I'm not really trained to fight these big things. think I'm gonna go back over here and check on my sheep, okay? Peace out, guys. I'm out of here. And no one would have thought anything of that. They'd say, yeah, you know what? You didn't go to seminary. You don't have a college degree. Yeah, you really don't know how to fight. You gotta go take care of your sheep. We don't. We get it. But that's not what David says. Instead, David says, he runs up and he says, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the angel armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. And then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David. David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David ran at Goliath, right? This little dude ran at Goliath. He saw an injustice. He saw that the Philistines were trampling all over the Israelites. And his passions got ignited and he ran at it. And so then a question is, what is your passion? What is our passion? What battle are we running to? What is the name of our Goliath? What is it that awakens your passions? This thing that is so important to you that it gets you fired up, gets you riled up and ready to run into the battle. Because it's important to know who your Goliath is. And we'll look at 3 aspects of passions. We'll start with the first one, our people passion. Right? What group of people do you just naturally care about? Who is it that you're just drawn to them? You want to lift them from the place where they're marginalized, where they're dehumanized, where they're beaten and going hungry. Who is it? Who is that person that you're just drawn to care about? Much like that, to whom has God sent you? What group of people do you sense God moving you toward for this purpose of His mission? What group of people can you be a missionary to? Which people do you think God has called you to move in and become one with? It's kind of funny. Michelle, my wife, her aunt and uncle are missionaries. They're American citizens, but you wouldn't know it the way they talk about their orphanage they run in Africa. They become more in tune with that people group. And it's not them, but it turns into, and it's not us, it turns into a we when they talk about these people that they live around, that they live amongst, that they eat with, that they serve. So what group of people can you be a missionary to? Secondly, a people passion starts with the understanding that God is a missionary God. He's a sending God. And we see this in the Son of God, who came to this earth because He loved His rebellious people so much that He left His throne in heaven to take on a costly mission to redeem us. He saw us in our rebellious, horrible state and put on the flesh to come be with us. And as God sent Israel to be the light to the nations, the Father sent the Son, and now the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit sends us, the church, to bring God's good news and love to a lost and broken world. The essence of people passion is a yearning to redeem what is lost. It's the heart of a good shepherd looking for that lost sheep. Now, the manifestation of God's mission will be as different as people are, right? For some, it'll be reaching out and teaching disadvantaged youth. For others, it'll be reaching out to their neighbors for a meal or a movie, spending time to get to share with them your story. Some people will be spending time at a senior's home. Others, their cry will be to stop human trafficking. And this list on what Goliaths are in the world goes on and on that we're called to fight. And so when you serve others, you become involved in their lives. But that shifts to an identification, much like I talked about with my wife's aunt and uncle, missionary aunt and uncle. It becomes an identification. And just like Jesus did with us, Eugene Peterson, he quotes in John 1:14 in the Message version, he says it this way: the Word became flesh and blood, and it moved into the neighborhood. Jesus didn't just put on Facebook, I'm going to pray for you. He moved into the neighborhood. He lived among us. He loved us. He served us, and ultimately he died for us. So who is it in your life that needs you to be called like Christ? To the point that you identify with them, that you love and serve them. And that's where you watch this identity turn from them to us to we. And here's a few questions to help you with the next part. The cause passion. What group of causes lights you up? Which one puts a fire under your butt, in other words? There, if I put it in my vernacular, I can say it right. What issue of injustice makes you want to run into battle? If there was one area in which you could make a difference, what would it be? If there was something, money didn't matter, time wasn't an issue, and failure would never occur, what would it be? There are many broken places in the world, and there's lots of things that strip humans of dignity and evils all around. And here's what John 10:10 has to say, is that the thief comes only to kill, steal, and destroy. The thief only comes for one thing, right? When I work a crime at work, I'm not looking at the thief. We don't call a guy a thief that breaks into your house and puts your groceries away. We don't call that person a thief. We call him Walmart delivery, right? The thief has come for a specific reason. It's to kill you, to steal from you, or to destroy you. But Jesus is the exact opposite. He's come to make all things new, to bring life where the enemy has brought death. And Jesus not only said he was here to bring life, but to bring it to its fullness. See, the world's pleasures, the things you think are good, are weak substance of the true full life Jesus wants to bring to you and those around you. As followers of Jesus, we bring this message of hope and engage in a mission doing battle with the slings and harps God has given us. Now Moses, remember that guy, he was called to lead God's people out of the slavery and proclaims these words about God in Deuteronomy 10:18. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and he loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. One of the prominent indictments in the Old Testament is against God's people, whom he freed, because they didn't take up the cause of the poor and the widow. See, he says, I freed you, and you're supposed to take up their cause, and you didn't. And in Amos, it says, the people of Israel have sinned again and again, and I will not let them go unpunished. They sell honorable people for silver, and poor people for a pair of sandals. They trample helpless people in the dust and shove oppressed out of the way. And so after Amos takes the time to describe and list out all the ways Israel failed on their mission, he makes a declaration from God. Let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Now, we go from that and we introduce Jesus. We bring him onto the scene, who has fulfilled this promise of Abraham, right? Liberating us from sin, restoring us to God, and modeling how we should serve the sick, the imprisoned, the hungry, and the forgotten. Paul, when we read about him, he's following Jesus' lead, and he takes up offerings for the poor. And James stated that our actions towards others, the way we act towards others, should point them to the one who saved us. And James says it this way, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to care for the orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. So God, since the beginning of forever, has been redeeming his people and challenging us to address the brokenness of the world. And the third one we talk about is our influence passion. So the first two passions, they speak of the manner that is best to unleash your passion. And so to help us identify this a little bit better on our passions, we'll do a little biblical background, and we'll look at Ephesians 4:7, 11, and 13. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So now these fivefold missions of the church, we're going to call it the influence styles, and I'm taking this directly out of Rob Wegner and Brian Phipps' book, Find Your Place. And we refer to this as an influence style because they reflect different ways in which the passion of God is mediated through his people. And now this combination of the five styles becomes an unstoppable force for unity in the church as we read. So it's sort of like, if you'll remember, Voltron or the Power Rangers. These five different entities that come together to create this one large... They're all okay on their own, but when they come together, they create this one unstoppable force. That's pretty cheesy, isn't it? Yeah. But you get the point. Mm-hmm. And so an easy way for us to remember is we call this APEST, which stands for Apostle, Prophet, Evangelist, Shepherd, and Teacher. And these are the influencing styles given to every believer, not just leaders in the church. Did you hear that? Mm-hmm. They're given to every believer, not just the leaders in the church. See, a while back when we talked about the Sabbath, that Jesus did away with the priesthood, he did away with the priesthood and he made us all priests. We're all to do this work. And he says, I've equipped all of you, not just the pastor and the deacons. I've equipped everyone with this influencing style. And so the apostle, he sends and extends. The apostle was typically focused on missions and church planting. This is the person that sends people out and extends the work. The prophet, he questions and he critiques. The prophet becomes this guardian of the covenant relationship with God, challenging God's people to greater fidelity to God with words and his way. The evangelist, he's the one that invites and gathers. This person. They love to recruit others to the cause. They love to share the gospel and are naturally infectious and able to enlist people through their communication and actions. Shepherd, this is one I've been accused of in the past. They protect and provide. They're called to nurture spiritual development, maintain communal health, and they engender loving community among God's people. The teacher explains and organizes. They mediate wisdom and understanding. They bring comprehension, understanding of the revelations brought to the church. And so here's what you and I, we need to remember. We need folks across this entire spectrum in order to function well. We need every part of the body to be functioning well. We need everyone to be able to do these different gifts, just like the verse we just read. To each, God gave to each, some to be an apostle, some to be a prophet, some to be an evangelist, some to be a shepherd, some to be a teacher. Each influence style is broadly reflective of different approaches to organizational leadership. So each of these different sets, these different people, they bring a different perspective. And they offer a unique set of solutions to different challenges that face the church, or how things should be approached. And while each is valid in each insights, the real benefit again comes when they're all working as a whole. So knowing your influence style is important because you will often bring that style to your passion as you seek to meet the needs of people you serve or the cause you're passionate about. And so in their book, Finding Your Place, Rob Wegner states that there is a primary or dominant influencing style, which will be fairly obvious because it reflects your motivation. It reflects what drives you. And a secondary style will often be reflected in your means, which the means is how you seek to accomplish what you're motivated to do. So the survey I asked you to take when we talked about gifts, that's on Brian and Rob's website, it ranked my two two highest passions as evangelism and teaching, which kind of caught me off guard. But it did. But I'm not going to be one of those but or what about people that we talked about. So the way this seems to express itself for me as I thought about this is through sharing the gospel with those who don't know Jesus. That evangelism part, I never would have, both of them caught me off guard, to be quite honest. But as I thought about it, I thought, yeah, you know what, it expresses itself because I'm always looking for different ways to share the gospel in a real way. I had a guy I was so impressed with. He could put a roof on a house, and you could have a conversation about putting a roof on a house. And next thing you know, somehow he's telling you about the goodness of God while swinging a hammer, putting tiles down. And it just naturally flowed out of him. And I find myself looking for those opportunities just to have real conversations and share the goodness of God. And then in teaching, it turns out I really like sharing with people a way to explore themselves, to find out how they can reach out to their coworkers, neighbors, and everyone else that they come in contact with. And so as you do that, you'll find that even though it appears you have a primary style, you're not locked into that. Like I said, I'd been accused of shepherding when I was leading worship at a church, that I had a very shepherding style, protecting and wanting to bring everyone in, that kind of deal. But we can work. We're not tied down to one. We can work on all four. And here's why. Because Jesus was the perfection of everything. And Jesus was the perfection of all five of these. And if we're striving to be like him, then that means we can probably move in and out of some of these. But we've got some that are probably the strongest. And so we're going to identify and we're going to understand what our gifts are in the first part, right? Our sling and our heart. And today we're identifying the Goliath that God has called us to confront. So what happens when we join these two forces together, gifts and passions? Well, it creates a massive amount of energy. It creates a drive to propel you forward into battle. And this is the energy that mobilizes followers of Jesus to run into battle with the confidence of David. It brings purpose and passion to those who feel burned out and empty. It satisfies our thirst to indulge our passions in godly rather than ungodly ways. And gifts and passions combined drives us from within instead of motivating us with threats, punishments, guilt, and manipulation. Like when I got an F on my report card and my mom mashed the accelerator down on that Suburban on a tiny little 2-lane road screaming at me that I needed to change my grades. That was that external thing. Well, this is different than that if you ever made an F on your report card. This is coming from the internals of the Holy Spirit and as God motivates us with our gifts and our passions. And what happens is all of God's kids, all of us in God's little kids' kingdom here, we catch these gifts and passions and we put them together, focusing them on his work. We're all going to respond in a great answer. God, your kingdom come, your will be done. And if we do not allow God to master our passions are going to master us. But the good news is Jesus has freed us from being mastered by our passions. And his word gives us guidance to mastering them. Psalms 37:4, he says that we take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desire. In John 14:12, I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done, and even greater works, because I'm going to be with the Father. You can ask for anything in my name, and I will do it, so that the Son can bring glory to the Father. Yes, ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. See, delighting in Jesus means loving and putting him first in our lives. We delight by abiding, listening, and learning from him. Delighting in Jesus is allowing him to call the next step in our life. So Jesus says he will do anything we want, but then he adds, there is a purpose behind me granting your prayers and requests. And that was in that verse, so that the Son can bring glory to the Father. See, if what we do doesn't bring glory to the Father, then that's what our passions and our desires have to be focused on what God developed them for, not on something that brings something for us or does something for us. He gave them to us for kingdom business. So Jesus says he'll do anything as long as the Son may bring glory to the Father. And so when we're ready to share in Jesus' passion to glorify God, he's ready to empower us by answering our prayers and meeting our needs. Jesus delighted in his Father, and the Father acted on his behalf. When we act on the desires Jesus gives us, the Father is glorified, and we share and delight in the joy of God. So here we are. We've talked about our gifts a little bit. We've moved into this passions. And I'm hoping that this stirs something in you, that it awakens something in you, some questions, and that you seriously start looking at what it is God has created you to do. What type of character and calling do you have in your life? And if you've not done it yet, I want to encourage you to go online and do this free assessment. It is a great next step. It is a great way to help you focus in to what it is God's called you to be, what your gifts are, what your passions are, and what it is you're directed to do. It's not the end-all, be-all, but it's a great tool to get you started in the right direction, especially if you're saying, I have no idea. But do it. It's a great step. Another great step, I think, is to be here next Sunday as we talk about stories, and we put this together. We put together our gifts, our passions, and our stories, and it creates this thing that Brian was so excited to create when he wrote this book, Find Your Place, GPS. And what does this GPS do for us in our lives? But it tells us where we're headed. It puts us in the right direction. It's our global positioning. But we're going with our godly positioning system. And so next week as we wrap this up, be here, and it's a great next step. Well, God, we love you. And we thank you that you've made us on purpose, for a purpose. And that we're not just globs of flesh and blood and bone flopping around here in this world, but that we have a reason to be here and we have a meaning to our lives, every one of us. And I just ask that me and all my friends, that you show us what it is our gifts is, and you show us our passions, and how we take these tools that you've put in our lives, and who our Goliath is, and that we go with the same David of courage, despite whatever we think of ourselves, that we see us the way you made us.